All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us while we got set up. Obviously, the EXP world was down this morning, so it made it a little bit difficult to come in and try and set up in 5-10 minutes on what we needed to do. So, first thing I want to check and make sure is that everyone can see the screen. Can everyone see that? Okay, perfect. So, as I mentioned, this is the.
If you guys, hold on, guys. If you want to see that better, if you click in the top right corner, you can hit the zoom button. It'll show you easier.
All right, so yeah, I'm James Moreno. I'm in here with my business partner, Robert Creamer, and together we created the 7S Network. And part of our hopes and goals is that we can essentially create a commercial division that is operable before EXP Commercial is officially launched. I'm really excited about today's session because this is one of the cool things that we get to do with our program is training. So where our training is a little bit more unique than your traditional glossary style A to Z style training is we take live deals that we have worked in the past and we show how we overcame obstacles and got creative so that we can get these deals across the finish line. So if you give me just a second, I'm about to pull up the flyer for this one and we'll go ahead and get started. All right, can everyone see my screen? All right, so we're going to start off. We have a building here in Austin, Texas. It was a revamped opportunity that was 6,000 square feet. I had a client that was a jacuzzi. There we go. All right, so as I mentioned, we had a retail facility that was completely rebranded and redone. I'm not sure why that keeps kicking out. All right, so we'll just keep going. Sorry about that it keeps coming in and out. But we had this property that's 6,000 square feet on a highly desirable neighborhood in Austin, Texas, kind of centrally located. It was going through a redevelopment. So in the past, it was built back in the 60s, 70s, and it hadn't been rehabbed in several years. So we came in and we had a tenant that wanted to occupy half the building that was a jacuzzi store. So as you can see, they were quoting $32 plus triple net when we first came in. So we negotiated, and I'm pulling up the letter of intent right now. So we went in and negotiated, and this is what we finally agreed to at the very end. We did a 60-month term with commencement happening upon completion of build-out or April 1st, whichever occurred first. We got them down to $28 a foot, annual increases of $1 per square foot. On their 32 they're quoting, they were also looking for $1 a foot. So if you look at it, that's a savings of about $13,000 annually throughout the course of the lease. So over the course of the lease, they've saved $65,000 by us negotiating down the rental rate from day one. So a huge win for them right off the bat. We also negotiated in 2 5-year renewals at then current market rate. Austin is a pretty hot market, so getting renewals can somewhat be tricky. It's going to be pretty common that you are going to get it at market rate and not necessarily at a set rate. Michael, I see that you're quoting to see better. If you just click the little zoom in at the very top, you'll be able to see a little bit better. I can make it a little bit bigger. But this is a standard letter of intent template that we use with our previous company. We have another one that we use that's similar to this. We got the security deposit to $10,000. Usually we have that equal to last month's rent. We had a generous TI package on this one, so we went up a little bit just in consideration. But one of our other big wins is that we got $20 per square foot in TI allowance on a shell space, plus 10 tons of HVAC capacity. Landlord is also going to finance $50,000 in additional TI allowance, which shall be repaid by the tenant on a monthly basis of 6%. So that was one of the first hurdles that we had to overcome early on in the transaction. Is my client went out and got a small business loan for $125,000. The problem was that only covered the cost of inventory as well as a couple other startup items like marketing and stuff like that. So when it came to the build out, he really had no funds to put in himself. So we got them from $10 per square foot in TI allowance up to $20. We were able to double that, which ended up being about $62,000. And they were going to pay for the 10 tons of HVAC capacity, which was sufficient for his needs. So right there, you're looking at about $80,000 to $90,000 value that is being built into the lease. He was still short about $30,000, so we went back to the landlord and said, we're still short on this project. We have a tenant that wants to do a long-term lease, so would you be willing to finance us the difference at a 6% simple interest rate and amortize it over the course of the loan? And they agreed. So again, it was nice that we were able to get creative to make this deal work. And that's one of the beautiful things about commercial real estate, is that almost anything in these deals can be a variable that you can manipulate, and as long as both sides agree to it, we can make deals work. Parking is a major issue. It's something that we always address and go by, but it's just, we even have struggles with parking here in Austin today. There's not a great solution for it. Anything that you can get guaranteed on the front end is amazing, but it's a hard topic. Next thing, we identified landlord responsibility of items that we would like for them to cover versus what we cover. Obviously, brokerage commissions. It's very important that you know what your market pays you as the tenant rep. I know here in Austin, we expect about 4% being on the tenant side, but if you go somewhere like Dallas, that can be shifted to 4.5%. So now that we've taken a look at the letter of intent, we can start looking at the next item. Bear with me for just a second. All right, so now we're going to actually take a look at the lease. And this is a standard TAR form. I was representing the landlord. I wasn't representing the landlord. I represented the tenant on this one. They, on their side, they did not have legal counsel going into it. They just wanted to use a standard TAR form, which is totally okay for us. We had no issues with that. Give 1 second, it was kicking me out. All right, so back on track. All right, so this project is a multi-tenant property containing roughly 3,100 square feet. Here's where we'd put all the legal info. Obviously, we've blocked it out for obvious reasons. Term is 62 months, so we were able to bill in 2 free months of rent on top of the 5 years, and on top of the other savings we got with the tenant improvement allowance and the additional financing going into it. So looking at it on paper, we were able to save this client well over $100,000, or at least that exposure right up front, through negotiating and helping him get terms that helped him start his business. Him being a startup, that can be kind of hard to do, so it was really the landlord being lenient and believing in our long-term vision of what we were going to do with this space. So in we go. It's a pretty standard lease. We did have a separate exhibit because it didn't fit into our boxes, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but that is very key in this specific deal. We did have some challenges going on a little bit later, and those will come up. Going through it, we have items like first month's full rent are identified on here. Items like commercial lease addendum for expense reimbursement. Those are the triple nets. You want to make sure you have that box checked if you're doing triple nets. It's a pretty standard form, and every local market has their own statewide. So if you haven't seen one or would like some help filling one out, please feel free to reach out to Robert Creamer or myself. We'd be happy to offer our expertise on it. We're going to keep going. This is all pretty standard stuff. As you can see, our security deposit was $10,000. Utilities was 100% covered by the tenant. I'm going to keep going. All right, so section 15, item number C. This is a pretty big ticket item that can typically hold up a lot of leases. It's who pays for what and when. So this is where you can break down, okay, the landlord's going to pay for these services, the tenant's going to pay for these, and probably the biggest one that holds up most deals is the HVAC systems. Who is responsible for maintaining it? Who's responsible for replacing it? That's probably one of the biggest kickers that stalls every deal. And I get it from both sides. If you're representing the tenant, you don't know the condition of the unit going into it. It could have been dogged out, or it could be on year 14, and you know that you're only going to be in the space for 3 years. So say it goes out in year 1 or 2 and you have to replace it and you know you're leaving. That's a big expense that a lot of businesses aren't ready to take on. Looking at it from a landlord perspective is you are leasing the space to a tenant and you're hoping that they are taking care of your equipment. You can't know because you're not operating or on the premises at all times to see how they're treating the unit. So again, it's a never-ending battle of who has responsibility. One creative solution that we typically like to offer is maybe a deductible system. And what that kind of looks like is we tell the landlord or have the landlord request that the tenant will maintain a quarterly service contract minimum with an HVAC specialist, and then we can bill in that any expenses past, let's say, $1,500 would be the responsibility for the landlord, but the tenant's going to cover the first $1,500 annually to show that they have some skin in the game and know that they're going to take care of it so that they can avoid those costs as well. Again, you can get creative to make these deals work for each deal, but it's just something you can think about. Next, this is all pretty standard language. Next thing I'm going to go into is kind of what went wrong, right? That's where we can really start to learn from these deals. So, not sure. I want to take a look at the special provisions. This is where we outlined the tenant improvement allowance along with the HVAC. We also put that they're going to finance up to $40,000 in additional TI. This is where we outline this language, and it's very important because it does come up. We had some legal issues come up later, and we'll get to that right here. So the next thing I want to focus on is this lease schedule. So as you can see, we had concrete dates that state that on June 1st, they were going to start exercising their 2 free months of rent. After that, August 1st, that is when the first month's rent is due. So as you can see, it's pretty straightforward, right? It's not rocket science. It's not tricky language. It's self-explanatory. And you can see the client has signed here twice. We also have the tenant improvement reimbursement plan in here for the loan amount, the interest rate, and the monthly add-on that will be to the rental rate. So as you can see, we have $7,200 in base rent. We have $773 as added on for the build out, and then past that you also have your triple nets on top of that. So we're looking at about $11,000, a little bit under that, $10,000 to $11,000 year one with their rent. So here's where things started getting pretty interesting. We get into the HVAC issue. And so we hear from the contractor, and he's stating that the landlord is not willing to pay for the HVAC. And we had a pretty tight budget, as I mentioned before. And so we had to go back and pull this up and call out the agent and say, per the lease section 35, it states you will provide 10 tons of HVAC. We do not care how this gets done, but it needs to get done ASAP. Otherwise, you are in default and the tenant shall seek a lease space elsewhere. So again, the landlord wasn't even aware of the deal he signed. He wasn't aware that he was responsible for the HVAC system. He believed it was just the tenant improvement allowance. And obviously, an expense like that can definitely create some issues if everyone's not on the same page. So the next item that I want to go into is the contractor. So the contractor, it really put us in a tough situation as well. He really wanted the business. He wanted to come in and quote that he can get the job done for $100,000 and in 45 days. The truth of what really happened is that his budget inflated all the way to $140,000 is what I think it ended up at, and he delayed the project by over 3 months. He thought he was going to be able to get by without an architectural plan. And in the city of Austin, that's just not going to work. I mean, this guy was a real piece of work. So what it comes down to is that we have a discrepancy in funds of about $10,000 to $15,000 that are pretty much unaccounted for. We have, through the tenant improvement allowance, we are up to about $120,000 total of what we can allot. So there's, again, about a $15,000 to $20,000 variance. So what we did to just help make sure that this moves along, and we were sorry because we made the recommendation on the contractor, is we conceded $5,000 of our own commission dollars to go towards the extra cost of the contractor. And obviously the landlord didn't, with the amount of money he had already put up front, didn't want to lose a tenant, didn't want to lose the deal, covered the remainder while our client picked up a portion of it as well. So again, it's not ideal, but in certain situations, it's way better to collect something rather than nothing. The next item that we want to talk about is, okay, we get to that mark where they're ready to open the doors, and they are hit with an invoice because they have not been paying rent. They were under the assumption that they didn't have to start paying rent until the construction was done. So we get a threat letter from their attorney stating that we are responsible for the full $66,000, or they were going to be suing us for $66,000 on the basis that I did not let him know that the dates would not be moved, or he wasn't aware of his dates, is what he stated, that I forced him into signing this deal, and the last is that I acted as attorney without being a licensed attorney. So as you can see, their demand letter stated that we should be paying $67,000. I'm sorry, this was actually our response letter. But essentially, what they asked for was they wanted to point the finger. They never submitted their security deposit. They never started paying rent based off that rent schedule. Let's see. Yeah, I can adjust that. Is that better? Okay. So yeah, to go back to essentially what happened here is they were delayed by the 3 months, and so the landlord came in and said, you know what, the space looks great. Here is your bill for $56,000 in back rent, as well as no security deposit. And again, we had correspondence where we could show that we advise you need to pay your security deposit. You need to here are the items that you need to do, as well as there's an exhibit stating when his dates took effect. And the last thing I want to show here is the text messages, where you can clearly see that, you know, the client here is here in gray and say, please try and have all paperwork signed and done today, even if you have to sit outside their office. Next one it said is, like I said, the lease has to be complete by Friday. There's no possible reason it takes 2 weeks to write it up. I have 2 other properties ready to go. So again, our attorney took a look at these documents as well as the email correspondence and sent back a letter stating, you know, you were never badgered. You were never legally represented in the form that James Moreno was acting as legal counsel. You signed a document twice stating you understood when the rental rates were set to come. And again, we still had this threatening suit letter. So we sent that off. I had to send a summary of what happened, and here's a snapshot of that. And pretty much I said, attached is a letter from the representative of a store that we lease over 3,000 feet. The client is claiming that I pushed him into signing the lease and stated I clearly did not define his rent schedule. Towards the end of the transaction, I did bring in Robert, my business partner, because it was getting pretty sticky. The lease was executed May 2nd. The contractor told us the work would be done by July 1st. It actually took 3 months for them to get done. Rent payments were set for August 1st. And then when, like I mentioned, when they opened, we hit a $66,000 bill. Once we sent back our counter letter saying we're not paying for any of this, you have no basis, nothing was handled incorrectly on our part as far as legal aspect. We never received anything again from this client. But at the same token, it's just not a fun situation to be in. So to kind of summarize is you can be by the book and do almost everything right. You can save your client in excess of $100,000. But if your client doesn't fully understand his lease or makes a bad mistake on his end, you are, as the agent, are going to be the first person that is pointed the finger at, so to speak. So kind of to wrap up and in this story is always make sure that you're in compliance per your local regulations. Do the best. If you feel that your client isn't understanding the lease themselves, please request that they get legal counsel, because at that point you're limiting the liability for yourself. And that's one of the things, one of my big takeaways from this experience is I knew the lease, but there were certain points where I understood that he didn't understand his lease as well as he needed to, and for that I take 100% responsibility. So seeing that story, I definitely, after sharing that story with you, definitely want to see what questions you guys might have about that process, or if anything was unclear about the story.
Yeah, this is Robert, guys. Just wanted to step in real quick. Hopefully y'all can hear me. I'm on it. But this was a very interesting commercial transaction in the fact that we had to step in, not only I had to step in and meet with our client several times, we had to meet with the attorney, and we had to make sure we were papered up, lawyered up, had all our ducks in a row. It just goes to show to really make sure you have everything in writing. One thing I always love to do when we email back to our clients, to almost restate the concerns, questions, and what we just talked about. So respond back. It's very clear they understood exactly what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and everybody should kind of do that. Unlike a house, there's a lot of moving parts in this world, and clearly we had some miscommunication on what our client and the landlord expected and thought was going to happen versus the reality of what was happening, and then we didn't hear about it until after the fact. So our job is not only to find the needs and wants and desires of our client, work through that, but then after and during the commencement and before opening, we have to make sure we're doing a better job of staying on top of our clients, what is being done, making sure it matches the timeline that we set out and the expectations with the landlord. The last thing we want to do is the landlord comes in and says, hey, this happened because you weren't represented properly. This happened because you didn't understand, because your broker didn't explain it properly. Nobody wants to have that happen, because we want clients for life, not a one and done. So just make sure we're always following up clearly, making sure they understand this is the timeline. Timelines are one of the biggest proponents of killed legal issues arising in contracts, whether it be a purchase or a lease. So make sure you write down specific dates and expectations and when things are going to happen. Put in a reminder in your calendar or a reminder text or whatever you need to do to help get that on track. It's very important. So keep that in mind. This could have gone south pretty quickly. Luckily, the landlord owns a ton of real estate in Austin, Texas. He was being very lenient, because at that point he said, Mr. Tenant, we're in this together now, so let's find a way to make this work and a win for both sides. And they did. So it ended up working out well, but these can go south pretty quickly. So just make sure you got everything in writing and clearly understood. I also wanted to state, within the network at some point, if we do start having obstacles running meetings and sharing screens in the workplace where you can't, or I'm sorry, in the world where you can't see or collaborate the best way possible. Well, as y'all are aware, within the network, we have the Microsoft Office full suite, and inside of there, we can use Teams. If we don't want to use Teams, we're going to use Zoom calls. The Zoom is really easy to record and really easy to share screens as well. So either way, we're going to make sure we have all of our ducks covered, and we're training at a better level than we did today, because I don't think the world's operating at 100%. We had a few obstacles, obviously. So just keep that in mind. And if we were, I say we're involved in the build out, but a lot of tenants, this is their first location in an area, and so they don't have some of the things done. And what I mean by resources, I mean as simple as, who do I contact if I want to put a sink in? Who do I contact for flooring? So they're looking to us as the professionals to use our network to suggest and help this move along the path. Especially with new store owners. This was this guy's, I believe, his first location in Texas. So he was unfamiliar of the process or what needed to happen with the city, etc. And the contractor is supposed to be advising, guiding, etc. But we have to make sure the contractors are doing their job at the highest level as well. So we weren't actually negotiating contracts or meeting them out there, but we did have to kind of stay on top of it, because like y'all are all aware, when anytime we deal with contractors, they may say something that's wrong just to get the business, and it's our job to help minimize the risk and liability our clients taking on. So not that we can avoid all of it, but we do have to stay on top of it. It's similar if you're closing a house or just a commercial real estate. We have the lender, did you get the docs in? Are we on time? What's the holdup? Do we need the tax cert? What else do we need to get this thing closed? Same type of deal. As the want to give maximum value, we have to stay on top of the contractors, the landlord, and our tenant to make sure they're moving along at the timeline they need to.
So as far as the contractor, we made that introduction, and typical best practice, we usually introduce them to about 3 different general contractors, let them interview and make the decision based on who they feel most comfortable with. Now, out of the introductions I made, this was the contractor I felt least comfortable with, and I did make that known to my client just because I felt he was just being anxious, to get the contract signed and get this new client. But I felt like his tactics were unrealistic, and I warned my client, but they made a decision based on the interviews they had, and that's the route it took. Does anyone else have any questions about this particular transaction or commercial leases as a whole? Would be happy to help and share some expertise on it. All right, we'll start with William. So he asked, what did we notice to get the price down? Hey, Robert, can you turn your mic off? Thank you. So I've been doing this for 5 years, and at that time we're at 3 years, and I knew that if we were extending the lease terms out, it was okay to ask for that sort of price point off. That was about it as aggressive as I was willing to be. It was a little in excess of 10%, but I also knew that they had been sitting on that property for about 2 to 3 months, and with it being a redevelopment, a lot of people weren't paying it much attention. So I always like to be just a tad bit aggressive, not insulting, but a tad bit aggressive, and see how much of a win we can create for our client. The next part was, so commission is paid on the whole term of the lease, correct? Unlike residential. That is correct. And every market can be different. Every landlord can be different. But typical standard of what we see is that we get paid on the total length of the lease. In Austin, if you're doing the tenant side, you're getting 4%. If you're doing the landlord side, you're getting 2%. And you usually receive that in 2 installments. One is the first half is when the lease is signed and executed, and the security deposit and first month's rent are collected. The second is typically once they actually move in and paid their first month's rent. So since there was about a 4 to 5 month layover between this process, we received half upon lease execution, and they usually have about 30 days to turn that in. And then we got the second half once they actually moved in and received payment from there. But there is no guarantee on how they're going to pay. Robert can actually share kind of a funny story that happened to him a couple months ago, where a landlord wants to pay him at a crazy periodic rate. Robert, what were the details on that?
We Pflugerville, Texas, for a group called Ninja. It's like Ninja Warrior for children and young adults. We put them in a lease space, finally negotiated terms with a $50,000 security deposit, which number one is ridiculous. But it was a startup, and that's what the owner wanted, and that's the only way we get the deal to work. It's a long story, but a lot of moving parts, which required us to have a specific type of location. This was one of the only ones that was available and willing to work with us. So that's what it took to get the deal done. End of the day, even with the $50,000 security deposit, the seller said, or the landlord said, "Robert, you did a great job. Hate to do this to you, but I'm going to pay you your commission every month." This was a 5-year deal, 18,000. You know, we had a referral to pay on it, and with EXP, specifically with EXP on the back end with SkySlope, you know, we are helping them create a better system for paying out on leases, be at execution and commencement. But if I had to go in there every single month, redo paperwork, and have them review it every single month, that is a nightmare in itself on what EXP might think. Like, are you kidding me? This is terrible. So I told them, I said, "Hey, look, I want these clients for life, and I might get more business from them. So you take my commission and you reduce my client's monthly expense." And he said, "I don't want to do that." So we did finally get to a number which he was okay paying. So we got down to $10,000, paid 50% upfront, which I still have not got, and 50% at execution, which hopefully will be in the next 10 to 30 days. Or I'm sorry, the second half wouldn't be for 12 months later. That was the best he for now. And, you know, there's not much you can do. If we were put in a tough spot, we had no options. This is one of the only and last spots we could get into. So my job is to protect my client, make sure they're taken care of, and this was it. So I ate it, and it is for life, and we still talk. So it's been great.
So to answer your question, again, it's per your local market, but no, that's not the way it works here in terms of commissions. The way it works here is the landlord pays the commission. So they go out and they get a listing agreement with an agent, and that agent typically negotiates the full commission for both sides. The way it works is that the listing agent typically takes 2% and reward the tenant with 4% at that point. So your fees actually get paid by the landlord, and it's actually a great way to obtain business because you have a lot of unrepresented entities out there that think they have to pay commissions, and then that conversation quickly shifts when you say, "Hey, you know what? My fees are actually paid by the landlord, so it's free representation for you, and you have someone that's working on your corner because the other agent does not work for you. They do not represent your best interests, and they collect a paycheck maybe even double the size if you are unrepresented." So it's definitely in your best interest to have representation for many reasons. Great question.
Hey guys, it's Robert again. Hey, we can certainly touch on it a little bit. If y'all did see one of those videos I posted the other day from Breckenridge, Colorado, you know, our number one job is lead generation. Well, right? So we do want to go over an entire class on options, maybe the top 10 ways to get leads in our industry. So we do want to go over that because it is so important. I've told for the last 10 years, I've said the same thing. I mean, you could be the smartest or the dumbest person in the room. If you have no leads, there's no difference. I mean, we can all go broke a lot of money the same way, right? It's all about leads. So it's all about how many people you're in front of, how often you're doing it, and then going from there. So, this business is easy. It's a consistent process and routine of going out there and about real estate. Right? Not to mention, we all have to have, I'd say, if you want to have a sustainable, long-term business, we're going to have to get in the area of 20 to 30 people we're talking to every week, which means they are somewhere in the process of working a transaction. They're either looking for solutions, writing a business plan for a future 6 month out. They're looking to sell their business, buy a new building somewhere, right? Somewhere in the transaction pipeline, we need 20 to 30, at least 20. See, 30 is a better number because everyone, they either can't find what they need. They're going to go through negotiations. If you're going to a contract, it could be 30 to 18 months before you get it closed. So it's a constant refill and close, refill and close, refill and close. Your activities on the lead generation front should never slow down. Regardless of what's going on in your business, that can never slow down. So one thing that I learned a long time ago is if you can take a certain time every week, every day, same time, just dedicate it to lead generation and just be consistent. That's the biggest thing I can tell you. It doesn't matter what you're doing as long as you're consistent. Just like a CRM. A lot of people say you have to have a good CRM. A good CRM, which is your contact management system to follow up with your clients, it doesn't matter what it is as long as you're using it. As long as you're looking at it every day and following it. So just get a game plan together. Start thinking about where could leads come from. And oh, by the way, we're with a company who has 16,000 residential agents who are talking to people about real estate. Now, on occasion, they talk about commercial real estate. And you want to be there to raise your hand and say, how can I help you with your commercial real estate referrals? This is the easy way in our business to get, that should be almost your number one priority. Going and speaking to as many residential agents, letting them know who you are, where you are, how you can help them with their referrals. Like we paid $150,000 in 2017. Last year, with the transition, not as many people knew us over here, but I believe we still paid north of $50,000 referral dollars. So get on Workplace, get on Facebook, LinkedIn, get on social media, get it in front of people. If you're in a smaller market, go find a residential company and say, hey, can I bring you donuts on my feet? And then talk about commercial real estate. This is what's going on in our market. Brand new shopping center going in at, West and Main. Educate them, look from contribution, ask for business. You're never going to get the business unless you say, do you have anybody that I can assist with right now? Always be closing. ABC, baby.
I feel like Robert just gave away my secrets. I actually taught a class a month ago for a small boutique brokerage and walked out with 5 leads when I walked out the door. The beautiful thing about being able to teach commercial real estate at these small residential firms is they will quickly see that they aren't truly interested or have the capacity to work commercial deals. So that is a great tip to do it. And Robert's 100% correct. I can't tell you exactly what to do for lead generation. It's just important that you do something. There was an exercise that we did a couple years back where there's 20 different items that you could do to lead generate. Pick 5 of them and master 3. And so residential referrals actually fuel my business. It's about 80% of what I do annually is developing relationships with residential realtors, and they send me business. The only one that Robert didn't really touch on is lease listings. Lease listings have brought me more leads than I originally anticipated for the simple fact of, again, a lot of tenants will call unrepresented, thinking that by hiring a realtor, they're in debt to them by fees. So they call unrepresented on spaces, and a lot of times they're calling uninformed, not knowing that my space completely doesn't work for them, but I'm able to convert that into a lead to work going forward. So those are my two easiest suggestions to make. But again, you got to find what works for you. I know I'm not a cold caller, and I have no interest in doing that. But I was able to create a business that was outside of that realm. So find something and just do it. All right, guys. Well, thank you for attending our first session. Again, our training is going to be a little bit different. We apologize again for EXP World going out. We couldn't have planned for that, and it kind of threw off how we were going about it. But we take real live deals every single month that we've worked on or worked on in the past, and we share our experiences. So it's a different experience every single time. There will be a different deal, a different set of challenges, and hopefully it's something that you guys can all benefit from. So again, can't thank you enough for taking a look at our network and seeing how we're looking to be a little bit different. And if you have any questions, reach out to Robert or myself.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. And we'll be posting soon when the next training is going to happen. And I have a feeling I may want to run through a multifamily transaction that we closed on to show you all why it was a good opportunity, where the win was, and how we got to the upside number we got to. Yeah, so we'll keep you posted on day, time, etc. Over, I'd say, tomorrow and the next week, we are going to be making questions people had on the 7S network, any concerns, and we want to get as many people signed up so we can get this group rocking and rolling with CoStar, LoopNet, and all the right tools. Expect a phone call from us pretty soon. And yeah, we look forward to it. The more we grow, the cheaper everything becomes. So we're excited. You'll enjoy your Wednesday. Have a great rest of the week. If you need us, find us on Workplace, give us a call, shoot us a text. Look forward to hearing from you guys soon. Bye.